Good morning, everyone. So, in this module, in this term, we have looked at the system of international relations between the two world wars, how countries related to each other, how they dealt with each other, what made them act in a certain way, and how the relationship hopelessly worsened until the beginning of World War II. For today's lesson, we're taking a slightly different approach. We're going to focus on a single country, Germany, and on the aims of its ruling party, the Nazis. In particular, we will look at the following points: the Nazis' rise to power, the abolition of the Treaty of Versailles, then at Nazi anti-Semitism, at the rearmament of Germany after World War One, at the idea of Lebensraum, and finally at the destruction of the Republic of Weimar. All this will be followed by a model answer to the question, of course, what did Hitler want to do when he rose to power? So, to simplify a very complicated historical issue, we can say that the rise to power of Adolf Hitler was a direct consequence of German defeat in World War One. The two things are incredibly connected and cannot be taken as distinct issue. So the rise of power of Hitler was a consequence of the German defeat and of the conditions imposed by the Allies in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Immediately after the war in 1920, Germany was a broken country. It was going through a period of unrest very similar to a civil war between the nationalist, the Freikorps, and the communist, the Spartacist. Later, the situation got worse with the economic crisis of 1923 caused by the French occupation of the Ruhr. The Ruhr was one of the richest regions in Germany. After a few years of respite, things took yet another turn for the worse as the economic crisis of 1929 threw Germany into the deepest economic crisis of its history so far. In all this, the Republic of Weimar, the democratic system that governed Germany, looked weak and ineffective. The moderate politicians felt unable to take care of the situation, and since crisis breeds extremism, the electorate started voting more for extremist parties like the communists to the left, who promised to get rid of private property and turn Germany into a workers' paradise just like the Soviet Union, and the Nazis on the right, who promised to declare war on literally every single one of the neighboring countries, take their land and kill their people. Quite surprisingly, most German voters and politicians thought that the Nazis' program was less dangerous because they hated communists and they saw it as a much more real threat to the lifestyle of Germany. And in 1933, Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party, was elected Chancellor of Germany, the equivalent of the British Prime Minister. So let's look at the abolition of the Treaty of Versailles. What did he promise to the voters in order to get elected? Now, the general aim of Hitler's political manifesto is what he promised to do once he was elected, was the destruction of the Treaty of Versailles. This crusade against Versailles was indeed the common thread that held together the Nazi political ideology. The treaty had humiliated Germany. Hitler asked the German people to vote for him if they wanted to rectify the situation and make the country great again. It is easy to see why the population of Germany felt so strongly against the treaty. It had reduced its territory by giving away most of its eastern parts to Poland and Lithuania. By giving away Alsace and Lorraine here in the west, and by turning some of the richest areas of the country into international areas that were outside the control of Berlin, of the government in Berlin, like here the Saar region, which became an international area. The treaty had also emasculated Germany by neutralizing its military capabilities and by forcing the country to pay an unreasonably huge amount of war reparations. By promising not to respect the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler found something the entire German nation could rally behind. It was one of the main reasons why he got voted into office in 1933. Another important part of his program was anti-Semitism, another important basis for German ideas in the 1930s was this incorrect belief that Germany had not been defeated in the battlefield, okay? That they still had the honor of the arms in a way. The German armies, many thought, had not been beaten and the country had not been invaded, and they do have a point. All the fighting had been done, had taken place in French territory. This idea, however, does not consider the very terrible state of the German army in 1918, which was completely unable to keep fighting against the Allies, which had been reinvigorated by the American intervention of 1917. They could not affect the fact that Germany had been defeated, and therefore they had to invent imaginary enemies, the Jews and the communists. Europe had a long history of anti-Semitism, and since medieval times the Jewish population had been persecuted and tormented in most European countries, including England, Spain, Germany, Italy, you name it. The Jews were often used as a scapegoat, and generally they were wrongly blamed for plagues and pestilences. Hitler seriously believed what he said. He seriously believed that Germany had lost not because its army had been completely destroyed, as it was in reality, but because there was some sort of Jewish communist conspiracy. His program was violently anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic means against the Jews, in a way, and called for the removal and for later the extermination of the Jews. Many Germans, of course, believed that as well, and this contributed to give him votes. He switched the blame of the worst catastrophe to ever happen to Germany not on the German High Command or the German army, but on an ethnic minority that was accused incorrectly of, working in the shadows to destroy Germany. I love this picture of the goose, and we will have a lesson about that, but I will explain it very quickly. This is about German rearmament. You see the swastikas, the symbol, but what about the goose? Now, one of the main characteristics of the German army was its discipline, which was exemplified in a way by a technique called the goose step, which was a way of marching. The German soldiers had of marching all in unison, all in a very disciplined way. This is why, in this case, this goose armed to the teeth is a symbol for German militarism, which has its root in Prussia. Now, the Treaty of Versailles also reduced the German army, this is why I put the picture of the goose, to a shadow of its former self. Germany used to be a very militaristic society. The army and the needs of the army were at the center of the economy, of the society, and of all the most important political decisions. It was, in short, the pride of Germany. Hitler promised to stop respecting the clause of the Treaty of Versailles that limited the German army to only 100,000 men, which is absolutely nothing compared to what it was during the war, when it reached, I think, the size of 2 or 3 million soldiers. The treaty also forbade the country from building a war navy. This was done under Britain's insistence, because, Britannia ruled the waves, so let's make sure that nobody ever threatens British supremacy on the sea, at least at the time. And they were also forbidden from building an air force, which was the new thing at the time. It was the latest technological development in terms of war. Now, Hitler, once he got into power, started rebuilding the army almost in secret, and we'll see that in the next lessons. Also, seeing the terrible state of the German economy, Hitler also promised that the new military industries would bring new jobs. So, millions of unemployed Germans, worry not, because there's going to be a lot of factories producing weapons, producing artillery, ammunition, tanks, and whatever, and you will work there. And if you don't want to work there, you can enlist and become a soldier. So it was also not just a matter of reinstating the pride of the German army, but also of offering an economically devastated country a new means of survival. Moving on to Lebensraum. Now, another fundamental point we need to understand if you want to understand why the Nazis did what they did, is the idea of Lebensraum. Okay, Lebensraum is a German word that means living space, living room, but not like a living room, room to live. Now, Hitler believed that Germany needed to expand its territory into the territory of the other inferior races, as he called them, mostly the French and the Slavs. The expansions of this allegedly superior German nation was to take place, obviously, via military conquest and extermination. So you need land, you grab Poland. You need land, you grab essentially the entirety of northern France. The main justification for this policy were two. There was still, first of all, there was still a large number of people who spoke German but lived in other countries like Czechoslovakia in the Sudeten, Austria, the entire country of Austria speaks German, Switzerland, a third of the country speaks German, Italy, there is a region in the north where German-speaking people live, and even in the Soviet Union there were German communities. The Germans were like the Greeks and the Italians, they are everywhere. So those lands where Germans lived needed to be taken from their current owners and given to the glorious German nations led by Adolf Hitler. The population of Germany, and that's the second reason, was growing despite the economic crisis. Okay, many believed that the territory of the country, and this was a staple, a cornerstone of German propaganda, that there are too many Germans for Germany. We need to expand and take land from other people. Many believed that the territory of the country would be unable to produce enough food to support them, and we saw something like this in the case of Japan as well. We see a growing population after an industrial explosion, a metaphorical explosion, after a huge period of industrial growth, and the territory with the current technology is either unable or just barely able to feed this growing population. Another point that we need to consider is the destruction of the Republic of Weimar. So all these points, the Lebensraum, Anti-Semitism, Rearmament, and the destruction of Versailles, and so on, all these points required a dictatorial government held by a single person who would not be supervised by a parliament or by other political checks and balances, which is what should happen in a democracy. So you vote for people in parliament, the people in parliament decide who governs, who forms the government, and those who take the decisions should always be under scrutiny from either the other branches of government, by the opposition in parliament, or by the public, by the press. Now, the Weimar Republic, which was the democratic republic that replaced the German Empire after the war, was seen as decadent, weak, ineffective, as a system put in place by the enemies of Germany. This is in the mind of the Nazis, like Britain and France, for example. According to the Nazis, it needed to be destroyed and replaced with a totalitarian dictatorship. So, those were the facts, more or less. Now I'm going to read you a model answer. Model answer to the question, what did Hitler want to do when he rose to power? Now, as you see, the points here are all color-coded. So the yellow one are the points of each paragraph. Okay, so the main point of each paragraph. What do you want to say in a sentence? Then you got the evidence, the historical examples you use to support your point, and then the explanation, which in purple, which is how those examples, those evidences that you brought are able to support your point. Okay, and finally you got in green the link between each paragraph. So the political program of the Nazis was a direct product of the German defeat in the First World War. Their main objective was to rectify the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, punish the ones they believed to be responsible for the defeat, and expand the borders of Germany. The Treaty of Versailles had been a complete disgrace for Germany. It had reduced its border, destroyed its economy. Hitler and the Nazis campaigned by promising to stop respecting its most humiliating articles, and in the turbulent political situation of Germany in the 1930s, this promise allowed them to gain a strong following. The most important points of this program concerned the reconstruction of a strong German army. The treaty had limited it to 100,000 men and forbade Germany from having any navy or air force. The Nazis felt that they needed a strong army to restore Germany's pride and to expand the borders of their country in order to gain Lebensraum. Lebensraum is a German word meaning living space, and it was one of the most important parts of Hitler's program. The Nazis believed that in order to sustain a growing German population and to rectify the injustice of the Treaty of Versailles, they needed to invade other nations and take their lands. All the points of Hitler's programs relied on a single assumption: the international order created at the Paris Peace Conference, where the Treaty of Versailles was signed, which revolved around the League of Nations and the neutralization of Germany, needed to be destroyed. So, that's it for today. I'm looking forward to read what you can write, and see you next time.